Hi, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to ACSA's Asian American Pacific Islander networking event. So great to see all of your friendly faces. Looking forward to seeing you guys again over and over this coming year. We have some really great conversation coming our way and an awesome guest. Her name is Victoria Dominguez. She's the Policy Director for Asian Americans Advancing Justice out of their Los Angeles branch. I'm going to have her introduce herself in a moment here. But before we get started, just wanted to thank our partners, Afloat. They will be here a little bit later to kind of talk about their products. We just want to be supportive to our partners. And that's all. And then if you have any questions or comments, put them in the chat and we'll try to monitor that chat for Victoria. But we're going to have an opportunity later to ask questions directly and also some networking towards the end of our program. We will be asking everyone to turn on their cameras though, so we can see each other's faces. All right, I'm going to hand it off to you, Victoria. We'll get started.
Great, thank you so much. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen and get started. Here we go. So hello everyone, my name is Nikki Dominguez. I am the Policy Director at Asian Americans Advancing Justice. You can also call me Victoria, and I am very happy to be here today. And I just want to start first by taking a moment and acknowledging that, what we're going to be talking about today, it's heavy and it's hard. And for a lot of folks here today, it's something that is very real and it's happening right now. And so I do want to take a moment to say that we are going to be talking about some things that might be a little bit heavy, but I really do think that we are within, sisterhood and brotherhood and allyship to be able to have these brave conversations. But, as I go through this presentation, there might going to be some topics that, might feel like I'm kind of just looking at a summary of a bigger issue, and we totally and absolutely recognize today's presentation is not supposed to be something like you take this 30-minute and then you got this, right? This is really what we wanted to do today, was really to start up conversation regarding larger issues by really condensing some data, but also sharing some background information regarding what's happening right now when it comes to the Asian American and also Pacific Islander community and kind of advocacy that is needed when considering what we're seeing with anti-Asian discrimination and hate crimes. So let us get started. So Asian Americans Advancing Justice Los Angeles, we are a part of a national affiliation of nonprofit organizations. We are the largest serving legal and civil rights nonprofit serving the Asian American community and Native Hawaiian and Pacific Islander community in the nation. And our mission is very clear. We are here to advocate for the civil rights, provide legal services, educate and build coalitions to positively influence and impact Asian Americans, Native Hawaiians, Pacific Islander communities to create a more equitable and harmonious community. And one of the things that I love about this mission statement, that it is about building coalitions. And we know that issues that we're seeing right now are not going to be fixed within just one community, but it is about building partnership, coalitions, and allyship. And that is part of our mission work, and that's what we're also going to be talking about today. So the first thing that we really wanted to talk about is give you guys a little bit more information of who is the Asian American Pacific Islander community in California. And for some folks, this is going to be not new data. It might be a new data points for some other communities, just because one of the issues that we often face with Asian American information and data is that it's often aggregated, meaning that we just take all of the Asian American communities and we just put it all together to create one image of a pan-Asian community, when in reality, the diversity within the Asian American community is very, very huge. And so it does impact regarding kind of what image and what understanding we have around resources and access and equity regarding the community. So we're going to be sharing a little bit about this aggregated data to be able to have a little bit better understanding of the community. So the first thing that we're going to talk about is going to be an overall kind of data points regarding California and the larger ANHPI. So again, AA will be Asian American, NH will be Native Hawaiian, PI will be Pacific Islander. And so one of the things that we have to talk about that in California, 1 out of 7 Californians are of ANHPI heritage. It's one of the largest growing ethnic group. And this is going to be also part of mixed families as well, but just having at least part of that or being self-identified as being an HPI, that puts us as 1 out of 7 Californians being part of the community. It is estimated that over 1/4, so around 28% of undocumented Asians reside in California. So from the whole pool in the United States, 28% reside in California. We have by far the highest concentration of any state. And nearly 1/3 of the total ANHPI population in the United States lives in California. Again, we have the highest concentration statewide, and we also have here in the state some of the highest concentration outside of the native country of communities as well. Asian Americans are the largest growing undocumented population by percentage in the United States, actually outpacing the Latinx community. So when we're talking about immigration or that kind of conversation, often we don't talk about Asian Americans, but in reality, Asian Americans is the largest growing undocumented population by percentage in the United States. In California, currently ANHPI makes up around 12.1% of our public California education system. That is going to be growing. This was actually about almost 2 years ago. So we are thinking it's probably going to be around 12.5 at this point, but we know that this is coming as well. While we see that certifications and kind of staffing continues to fall behind that trend as well. When we come to conversations about educational attainment, this is going to be, again, this might be a little bit shocking for folks because when we think of Asian Americans, we think of really high achieving students who are college bound. But what we see actually is that education attainment rates within the NHPI community can vary almost by 60 percentage points across, meaning that from the communities that have the highest education attainment as here, which is 25 and older with a bachelor degree or higher, to the lowest, there's going to be around 60 percentage points in difference. And one of the other things that we have to think about, and you'll see it here, is that there are a lot of Asian American communities below Californian average, but also below, African American and Latinx. And this is going to be our low Asian community that we don't often talk about, but they are the lowest education attainment ethnic group in California, with also having Samoan and Hmong and Cambodian communities also being some of the hardest hit when it comes to education attainment. On the other side, we do recognize that, we do see high achievement data points for the Indian and Malaysian, Bangladesh, Korean, and Pakistani communities. That is, we can have a conversation about what hypersensitive immigration looks like and the impacts in communities, but this would be a byproduct of that issue as well. When it comes to high school graduations, this might be a little bit more relevant to some of the folks. You'll see that high school graduation rates for Asian Americans and Native Hawaiian subgroups vary by 21% points. In 2014, only 47% of Asian Americans and only 17% of Native Hawaiian Pacific Islander 11th graders tested college English ready, and only 31% of Asian Americans and only 5% of NHPI, so Native Hawaiian Pacific Islanders, tested 11th grade math college ready. You'll also see, again, graduation rates varying very much, impacting, again, very much Southeast Asian communities with, again, Samoan, Low Asian communities continuing to take the hardest hit when it comes to high school graduation rates and college readiness. When we come to poverty, that's another question that we often get asked about. You'll see that in California, Hmong and Cambodians have the highest poverty rates in the state. And this with 42% of Hmongs that live in California being under or poverty rates, federal poverty rates, and Cambodians as well, outpacing both Latinx and Black communities in the state and being well below population state average. We'll see, again, a recognition that some other Asian American communities are doing much better. And it is very much, again, on trend with some of the other issues, not issues, but other factors that come in with hypersensitive immigration systems that have influenced and artificially impacted those numbers as well. Another thing that we will talk about would be language and EL. In 2013, around 35% of Asian Americans in California and 13% of Native Hawaiian Pacific Islanders are considered limited English proficient, a higher rate than Latinos who are at 30%. Meaning when we're thinking about parents, of EL students, a lot of times because of the vast majority of our students are Spanish speakers, that's where we think about EL issues and EL resources. But in reality, when we talk about needs versus kind of equality, and we're talking about more equity, Asian American parents are more likely to be English limited proficient than Latinx parents. And they're also more likely to not outreach or interact with their schools because of language limited issues. And then EL students are often left to be able to navigate that system by themselves or with support of a teacher or somebody in their school, but it becomes a lot more complicated and a lot more stressing and traumatizing for both the child and the family long term. When it comes to higher education, what did this translate into? You'll see very much that another conversation that we often don't have is that Asian Americans are by far very first generation students, right? They are the first in their families to go to either community college or in this case, in the slide that we're looking at, CSU. So we're seeing that over 80% of Fijian, Samoan, Laotian, Hmong are first in their families to go to college, meaning that there is still very much a huge challenge and a gap in resources in their community and also social capital when it comes to higher education in a lot of these communities. This very much replicates in our UC system. Over 70% of these same student populations are going to be the first in their families to go to college at a UC. So very much a little bit different, right? I think a lot of times I've been to state presentations regarding Asian Americans, and we can even have a very recent example of a school district in Washington thinking that they were going to take Asian Americans out of students of color and put them with whites because they don't have academic needs or challenges like other communities of color. The data doesn't support that, right? What we're seeing is very much a continuance of variation within access and resources available to different Asian American communities. So, part of kind of our challenge as we have this conversation moving forward as well is making sure that when we say Asian American, we understand that there's a wide diversity of not only identities, but also lived experiences here in the US for the different communities. So let's talk about what's happening now, right? And I think that this is very much really talking about what we're seeing with the increase of Asian American discrimination and hate crimes. And I think that, we've seen a wide range of these issues. And I think that the media has really uplifted a lot of the stories and incidents that are happening. But I first really do want to start that this is not something new for the Asian American community. This has happened for many generations. We also have to remember that the Asian American community, it is an immigrant community of color in the United States. And so there are going to be a lot more incidents happening as well throughout history that really impacted kind of a sense of security for the Asian American community. Have we seen a absolute increase in violence in these incidents happening now in the last 2 years? Absolutely. And then can we identify a new trigger point that was used in order to justify these incidents? Absolutely. But again, as we have this discussion, we have to recognize that this is not something new, or that we didn't see this coming. This is very much online when we saw the Black Lives Matter movement coming and being like, no, this is not something that we just get to say, we didn't see it coming. Where was all of this? It's always been there. And this is just a new generation of awareness and work in civil rights that needs to be done as well around this issue. So, Stop AAPI Hate. As of March 19, 2020, between March 19, 2020 and February 28, 2021, Stop AAPI Hate received 3,795 reported incidents of racism, discrimination targeting Asian Americans nationally. 45%, so 1,691 of these incidents are in California. So this is not a conservative state issue or, the South issue or anything. This is a state issue, even in a state as progressive, quote unquote, as California. This is something that is very much happening. So what are some of the types of incidents that we're seeing? Because one of the things that we need to understand is that AAPI hate and discrimination incidents is it's a spectrum, right? And so what some of the issues that we'll see is that verbal harassment made up 68% of the incidents. Shunning or avoidance compromised around 20%. Physical assault came up with 11% of the incidents. Coughing and spitting compromised around 7% of the incidents reported. And again, these are the ones that have been reported. We understand that many incidents have happened and folks and community members have not uplifted this. And so we can only imagine really the reality of the issue, that is currently happening and continues to happen. But this is just from the data that we currently have available. Who are the most vulnerable populations based on data? We've seen that women are attacked 2.3 times more likely than men. Youth under 20 years old compromised 13%, and elderly 60 and over compromised 6% of the incidents happening. So although we see a lot of coverage regarding kind of the incidents happening with our elders, usually they're a lot more violent, and also at this time, we see that these are the ones that the media has to really be focusing on. But the data shows that youth is very much suffering from this, over twice as many incidents than our elders. And so it's a problem that we need to want to make sure that we have strategies to support our youth. Because also we're getting reports of youth being scared to go back to school, or kind of like being able to interact with their peers once school opens. And, we've also been seeing reports from parents being very scared of returning their children this spring, right? Instead of really waiting until much later so they can understand and know what steps their schools are going to take to keep their children safe, right? And so these are also conversations we have to do. The data shows, right, as we're seeing right now, that again, youth are twice as likely than our elders to be having this issue. And it is very much an issue that is very present in students and their parents' mind. Where are these things happening as well? Clear civil rights violations. We're looking at workplace discrimination, refusal to serve, service in establishments, transit or rideshare make up around 9% of the incidents. Business were top site of discrimination incidents, making up 35% of those issues actually happen within businesses as well. So I think what we're trying to kind of transition onto right now would be, how do we get here? And I really want to preface this as, again, this is not to say that this is the whole story, or this is going to give us the whole image around this issue, but it's really about trying to uplift some key points for discussion and for hopefully pique your interest to learn more about our community. So I want to take a moment here and also talk about brave space because we're going to be talking a little bit about harder topics. So we are very comfortable with safe space. I think all of us have thought it or taught our children part of this or our students at some point, or we have ourselves been participants of establishing safe spaces, right? And this is kind of we agree to disagree, or, we're not taking personal attacks, don't take things personally, assume positive intent, and respect others, which are all really, really great. The really hard part is that we know that knowledge and learning is constructive, right? So we actually build on tension and discussion in order to create new knowledge and test knowledge as well for the creation of those spaces. So we're really going to be challenging folks today to actually do brave space, which is be comfortable with controversy and disagreeing with one another. There are core things that you have the right to not agree with, even if you disagree with it, right? Like if there's something fundamentally wrong, like racism, we don't agree to disagree on racism. Racism is bad, and we just disagree on that, right? And distinguish between people's ideas and the people themselves, but you can challenge the idea, right? So instead of no personal attacks, really challenge the idea, not the person, but you can still have a discussion regarding that person's idea. Take care of yourself, so please establish boundaries that you're comfortable with. Don't allow others to establish boundaries for yourselves as well. Own your intentions and your impact. Just because you didn't mean to be harmful does not mean you do not have responsibility to acknowledge when harm is made by a comment that you made, and that's okay as well. It's a learning experience. And so as we go to some of these topics that I'm going to cover, let's just remind ourselves that it's okay for us to not fully agree with all these things and to struggle with some of the information being shared. So for us to understand a little bit of how we got here when it came to Asian American discrimination and hate, we have to talk about immigration, right? We often do not understand or take a moment to acknowledge the long history of exclusion, discrimination, for Asian American immigrants throughout our history, right? From, you'll see the timeline here, I won't go through it all, but you'll see points like the Chinese Exclusion Act. You'll also see Immigration Act of 1924 that extended the implications of previous exclusions to include other Asian immigrants. And you'll also see internment camps here in California, right? During the World War when, we chose to make Japanese Americans be put into internment camps because they were Japanese and therefore they were a threat to our society. And there's continuous hits around this. So when we're talking about Asian American discrimination, it is a history of immigrant communities in the US. Different waves, absolutely different experiences. We cannot, compare, different communities as they went through. Southeast Asians coming here as refugees, right? Very different experience, different needs that they needed from the states that they failed to receive versus other communities that came through hypersensitive immigration, meaning immigration that allow for people of higher socioeconomic and skills to enter the country for tech and other businesses, right, and other fields. The other thing is that we have to recognize that the Asian American community does have and continue to struggle with anti-Blackness and colorism, but we want to recognize also that part of informing xenophobia, racism, and colorism is white supremacy. At the end of the day, here in the United States, Anglo-Christian ideology, or white supremacy as the term is used now, informs, what anti-Blackness look like and colorism look like in many countries and throughout the world. And I also do want to recognize that as an immigrant community coming into a country that is, white at the top and black at the bottom, there was always a pressure to find yourself within that scale that often impacted the tensions between the Asian American and the Black community throughout, our interactions as communities of color here in the United States. So one simple macro example that of kind of these tensions and histories have been kind of talking about the Chinese Americans in the Jim Crow South. Many folks don't know this, but after slavery was abolished, Chinese Americans actually moved to the South in order to help in the cotton fields. This brought a new immigrant community into a historically Black and white social kind of structure. During that time, it was very much expected that Chinese Americans were other, right? But they weren't Black and they weren't white, so they kind of had to find a way in the middle that impacted, again, their relationship and tensions with the African American Black community of that time. So one of the ways that we see this tension translating was actually the way in which Chinese Americans families in the South were able to obtain access to white schools during this time. As you can expect, they weren't white, so they were classified as color, and therefore were expected to attend schools for Blacks as well. This issue became a moment of contention for a lot of Asian Americans who then felt very pressured into assimilation and adopting white racial paradigms and desirable cultural markers in order to become accepted into white schools, which they in some counties did. And this also created a lot of tensions with the African American community because they didn't have the ability or were not provided the chance to do that assimilation. An African American person at that time couldn't just say, well, I'm changing, X, Y, and Z things, and now I can be seen as less threatening and more white-like, and therefore could be accepted. Asian Americans were able to do that because they were within the spectrum and defining their own identity and translation there. This is also where we first start seeing literature or examples of what we will later be seen as the model minority myth, and kind of thinking of Asian Americans as being passive and non-threatening by white Americans for acceptance. So what is the model minority myth, and how does it impact kind of some of the racial tensions that we currently see between the Asian American community and the Black community as well? Well, the model minority myth is a socio-political term and concept used to downplay the struggles and claims of other communities of color by uplifting Asian Americans as exemplary of upward mobility through individual achievement, and characterizes Asian Americans as integrated, modernized, and civilized. So again, this was not a definition or a concept brought by Asian Americans, but it was one utilized by white Americans in order to downplay the struggles of other communities of color by picking one community over the other. So if this community, if the Asian American community is integrated, modernized, and civilized, those that were not, right, so African Americans, Latinx, that were not, then that meant that they were not integrated, unmodernized, and uncivilized, right? And that social political conditioning of that tension became part of why the model minority myth impacted the way in where African Americans and other communities of colors were being treated, because they were like, if African American community needed support, they were like, well, look at these other communities, they're doing just fine. So it's because you're lazy, it's because you don't work hard and stuff like that, because look at this community, they're doing great because they do that. And in reality, not equating or not really making sure that they understood that this community was dealing with, transgenerational trauma of slavery and other issues. And the Asian American community had been given some conditional privileges in order to provide that scale weight. That again, at the end of the day, it's all about white supremacy and keeping the white American model as kind of the superior model by pinning communities of color against one another. Another way that we see this again in the South, when Chinese Americans, there was a kind of movement out of the fields, they established grocery stores that would serve Blacks in the South, Black African Americans in the South, and that were not served by white stores, right? So they created a new economic kind of upwards mobility model and ability to be able to do that. And this actually didn't just stop during this time. Even currently now, Asian Americans are more likely to get loans from banks to start a business and become entrepreneurs than African Americans. And this is something that continues to be seen as kind of these communities have a track record of being entrepreneurs and being able to create these businesses. But in reality, it's a systematic issue that allowed them to have access to these financial capitals to start these businesses that the African American community continues to not have access to. So in another, in an economic example, you see that again, conditionally, Asian Americans and African Americans have been pitted against one another by creating these inequities in access and creating one system over the other that are impacted negatively both communities as well. But one of the things that we often don't talk about is that tension between our two communities, yes, it's very real, but it's actually not the whole story. So I wanted to see, and hopefully this works, but I wanted to show you all this video fairly quickly.
People barely know about Asian American activism. It's becoming more visible to the mainstream in the most recent period. We have a very long and rich history of protest and active organizing against racism and for transformative change for liberatory communities. For example, in Hawaii in 1920, to protest the work conditions on the sugarcane plantations in Hawaii, the Japanese and Filipino sugarcane workers united and had a huge industry-wide strike.
Mobilization was largely ethnic specific, but notably that changed in the 1960s. Of course, with the civil rights movement, free speech movement, anti-Vietnam War movement, and the emergence of the Asian American movement itself, that brought together Americans of various Asian ancestries. So the term Asian American itself is a political coinage that reflects this emphasis on unity. Asian American movements also work in multiracial and transnational solidarity with other groups, both in the United States, but also with people in the developing world who are fighting against racism, neo-imperialism, racialized labor exploitation, structural inequities such as access to housing, food, and healthcare that bound them together. In the 1980s, when Southeast Asian refugees first arrived in the United States from Vietnam, Laos, and Cambodia, Southeast Asian parents and Latinx parents worked together to ensure bilingual support for their children and equitable access to the curriculum for their children. You've got Grace Lee Boggs, who was a dedicated advocate and long-term advocate for African American communities.
Asian American and activism seems like oxymorons, which they are not. Studying Asian American activism, it changes, it transforms us, I think, to think of ourselves as connected to a history of resistance and protest. It changes how we think change happens in society. It is through hard work, it is through education, but it isn't only through that.
I really want to encourage the younger generation of Asian Americans to really delve into these histories, to learn not just about the particularities of the challenges facing our communities, but also these kind of long and intertwined histories of solidarity, of coalitional politics, right? It is critically important for all of us to be at the table speaking about this, and for allies, to come together and support communities that may not have the resources, that may not have the platform.
Really not just struggle for the low-hanging fruit, not just struggle for the things that are actionable items that we can do kind of in the immediate, because so often those turn into transactional reforms, when what we really need is long-haul social movement building. There's something that happens when we dream big and when we have a radical imagination. We begin to see the world that we actually want. People are talking about a lot, right? Which is self-care. And I like to think about it as collective care. And this is a lesson that I've really learned from Yuri Kochiyama. And she's, of course, best known for having worked with Malcolm X. She always cared about the political prisoners. She would tell people it's their birthdays, you need to send them a card. She always asked people how they were. And I think it's really important that we take time to take care of ourselves, whatever that means. And I think to be reflective and to slow down.
So that's pretty much kind of where one of the things that we want to lean in. So unity and diversity and kind of advocating for APIs, means advocating for all, because we are connected into a community with one another. And so when we are talking about Asian American discrimination, we are talking discrimination and impacts and incidents in other communities, because if we can strengthen our ability to answer the call of one community, we strengthen our ability to answer the call for all communities of color. We are a community that is rich in activism, is rich in coalition building, from working in the fields between Filipinos and Latinos here in California with Cesar Chavez, to what you just heard with Yuri and Malcolm X. Our solidarity with all communities of color is rich. And although we have seen and continue to see the tension between the Asian American community and other communities of color, we know that this is not coming from our communities. This is coming from, a system of oppression to keep one community on top of the other that impacts generations to come. And so as a system and as system practitioners and, people that work in it, we can help to break that silos. We can bring those conversations forward for our students as well. So what can we do? And I will breeze through this because I know I'm killing time here. But one of the first things that we have to talk about is that hate violence is not isolated. So hate violence can occur through physical violence, as we have seen time and time again in the news, but it can also take place in forms of verbal harassment, threats, intimidation, vandalism, bullying, and civil rights violation. Hate violence can also be and is systematic, institutional, and interpersonal as well. And so we know that when we're talking about having a commitment to fight against anti-Asian discrimination and other forms of discrimination for other communities of color, it is not just about those physical incidents or those things that you see in TV. Like, we have to take a moment and see at the systems that replicate, reinforce, and project these injustices and violence as well. And so there is issues in our criminal justice system, in our public health, education, banking, and housing that continues to breed those conditions that allow for these injustices to be normalized, that we are now starting to, as society, get better at identifying. But we want to make sure that we know that when we're making a commitment to fight on these issues, that it is part of a larger kind of institutional and systematic problem in our country as well. So what are some community focused strategies that we wanted to uplift? First one that we wanted to do is that it has to be a multifaceted response to incidents of hate and violence directed in our community. So it's not just about one issue, one incident, and that's what we do. It is, we have to look at the issue from different angles, as mentioned below, above. Focus on community-centered solutions, because the solutions for interpersonal violence, as the ones we see on TV, is not it's not more systematic state violence, right? We don't want more policing and harm in our communities in the form of aggression, discriminatory laws, enforcements that, enables more harm in our community. So I know a knee-jerk reaction that we often have when these sort of things is like we come down hard on the people doing this, but we don't often talk about how we got there. Support and fund restorative justice programs. Advancing Justice LA, we're one of the partners, state and national, that we believe that this is one of the best ways for us to systematically start breaking this issue down for generations to come, because it centers repairing the harm caused to the victim, but it also allows our communities to heal, and it reduces recidivism, right? So it's more about the rehabilitation and for communities to learn to be one another and learn history together versus further criminalizing our students as well. What about classrooms and schools, right? Because I think that often feels a lot more heavy because there's a lot more other considerations that we have to take. One of the first things that we uplift and we have fought for a very long time is Asian American ethnic studies. And history being shared. And so I am actually giving you all a cheat sheet here. If you all go to this website, Asian Americans Advancing Justice LA actually worked with PBS last year for the Asian American PBS series. And we actually took that amazing series that PBS did, and we actually created a curriculum for it, all the way from first grade to seniors. So whatever your school system falls under, there is curriculum that is tied with visuals from the PBS documentary, free, available, and ready to go, that can be utilized by anyone. And the other thing about it's really cool is that they also have themes. So if you want to talk about, activism, civil rights, even gender, there is going to be different curriculum or lesson plans available for different topics as well for different grades. Be proactive about anti-Asian bullying and harassment by talking to your students about what is happening and addressing any misinformation and myths students might be engaging in. One of the things that we want to make sure is that we engage it from that perspective and not from a punishing perspective, as a lot of students are really dealing with heavy things that many of them do not have the skills or the information or the words to really, deal with. And so how do we can be proactive instead of reactionary to any behavioral issues that we might see? And again, support restorative justice in your school sites and in your districts in order to create alternatives for further criminalization of children of color from a school to prison pipeline. Individually, right? And as professionals, what can we do? I think one of the first ones that we want to make sure is that we work on how do we recognize how we individually continue to enforce the model minority myth or other harmful stereotypes. As we saw, when you uplift one community through the minority myth, you are creating harm by enforcing that tension between communities of colors as well. So it harms both communities, even if you feel like it might not do so. Challenge the model minority or other harmful stereotypes when you see it, especially when it impacts students. So when we have, students be like really shy and, folks are like, oh, he's just, Asian American. So they're often very shy. That's not true. Some of the best artists and, radical activists, as you all saw, are Asian American, and we are a very loud and very proud community as well, with wide diversity and culture. And so there's more questions that we have to ask of why that kid is shy and kind of stuff like that we see. The other thing that we have would be in spaces, look around and ask yourself who's missing. This one is actually really important for us because although we appreciate a lot of the attention that we're currently getting from various partners regarding, Asian American issues and history right now, we have to admit that we are often the last ones invited to the table for many, many other issues, right? And so as an ally and as a partner and supporter, if we are in a meeting talking about, EL students, and there's not a single conversation being done about Asian American, EL students, why? or if we're, you know, at a training or a decision-making table and there's no representation of the Asian American communities, like we need to ask ourselves why and who's missing at that time as well, to create more of a representation and inclusion of communities in decision-making, but also in responsibility as well in different systems. And so I think for us, a lot of that personal things that we can do is about self-reflection, looking out the window and into the mirror as well. And I think that that's what part of allyship looks like, and a lot of learning. So as I mentioned, today's presentation was not meant to be kind of like a cover of everything, but I hope that it piques enough interest to learn a little bit more about our community, and how we have and we continue and we would love to work together to uplift all of our students and communities together as well. And with that, I think I don't know if I'm moving into questions actually.
Actually, I'm going to stop you right there. I'm going to let our attendees kind of digest all of your wonderful information. I'm going to ask our partner at Afloat, Chandler, I think you're in the room now. Victoria, or Nikki, you're going to have to stop screen sharing real quick, and Chandler's going to screen share. We're going to do a 60-second partner spotlight. We want to show our partners some love because they are the reason why we are able to bring some wonderful programs to you all year long. So Chandler, take it away.
Thank you. Perfect. Are you guys seeing my screen?
Yes.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Thank you, Margarita, for having us. And we're so excited to be partnering with ACSA this year. Look forward to a lot of good events this year, and we've already participated in a few. So real quickly, just wanted to highlight our platform, Afloat Special Education Service Logs. So this is actually a service tracking software that enables your providers, your special education teams to track services and progress monitor for their special education population. What you're seeing here is our website format. We also have it in an app format that we're really excited about, on your mobile devices, on your tablets, and so on. So really quickly, just going to get a quick 60 preview of the platform. Here is where a provider might enter a log. Pretty straightforward. You've got your student, your date, your start and end time for the services that have been offered to your students. It's going to ask for which goal you're tracking for. The really neat thing here with us is that we're able to sync with your IP management system. And so there's no duplication of effort here. So we can track goals. And on a nightly basis, we're going to keep the app updated with all of the maintenance of the goals happening in your IP management system. Session outcome notes, you're able to upload an image or make a checkbox here if your student was absent for their services. So really quick, I think we're running about 57 seconds per log right now, our analytics are telling us, so a really quick data entry for our providers. It all boils down to this aggregate data dashboard where your providers, your administrators, your special education directors can really dig into the data and really see all the services that are being performed for your student body, your special education students. You can dig down into the student level, which is going to show you a platform here. Interactive charts, graphs, it's really going to show you exactly what's being provided to your students. Here we can track Bell's progress over a length of time. All the data entry is here, so I can see all the white boxes are the service sessions. All the colored boxes here are showing me progress monitoring events. So I get a really great linear detail of how that student is progressing on their goal. For that analytic piece, also for reporting. So you can run customized reports out of the system. Once that data is being sort of flowing in from your providers, administrators can run reports and really analyze the data outside of the system as well. So thank you for having us. I know this was supposed to be quick, so I appreciate you just taking a quick look. I'm gonna actually put my contact information in the chat box. I'd love to hear from you. I know you guys may have colleagues, your special education colleagues. If you wanna pass this along to them, I'd love to meet with them. Quickly demo it, ask questions, learn about your district, and see if this is something that can help track services for your special education team. Also, for our raffle, we're gonna be raffling off you guys a 50% discount on implementation fee. So if this is gonna be something that fits your district, we would love to partner with you guys, extend that 50% discount for an implementation fee for any of your special education departments that may be looking for something to track those services. Again, thank you for having us. We're so excited to partner with ACSA this year. We look forward to many more events on next year's calendar and are excited about a lot of the work that you guys are doing. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Chandler, and thank you, Afloat. And I think we're going to pick a winner right now. Stephanie, are you able to pull up the raffle wheel for one of our winners?
Yes, hold on.
Isaac, you're our winner. I'll be sure to give Chandler your information so that you can redeem your parting gift from Atlas. All right, thanks, Stephanie. So I'm gonna ask Victoria to step back into the meeting room, and we are taking questions at this point in time from her, or for her, rather. Does anyone have any questions? Just feel free to unmute your mic and jump in. No?
Thank you, Victoria, for the information. Can I just jump in, Margie?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, Belen, go ahead.
Yeah. So it's great information. Both just the details, data, as well as what we can do about this. My question is on your screen on the history of Asian exclusion that was derived from the Smithsonian history. I noticed that it's only up till 1965. Is there, because as you know, the oppression, the exclusion is happening before our very eyes, and definitely from 1965 on. Do you have any more screens from Smithsonian or any link to that we can gather to have more currency of the info?
Yeah, we can share more info. The reason that we have it up to that is that often we have to fight for it to be recognized as an Asian American exclusion issue, right? So one of the ones that in the future you'll see would be the Muslim ban was an anti-Asian exclusion immigration law, right? And so often as generations go, we have to advocate for it to be recognized by the United States as a historical event of anti-Asian immigration. So up to this point, and what you guys saw is what the United States has recognized as anti-Asian immigration exclusion acts. But we can share more information, like what are some of the more nuanced kind of ones that we have seen and we continue to see and are currently fighting to this day. Another issue that we don't talk about is also how it impacted family immigration, like things like, the benchmark that we utilize for kind of citizenship that really impacts first generation immigrant communities from Southeast Asian countries as well. So we can share more information around that as well. Currently, what we have and what we share, like we said, is because that's what has been mainstream and accepted by the United States as anti-Asian exclusion immigration policy. Thank you, Belen. Any other questions?
No? Okay, I'm going to take that pause as a no and move us towards small group breakouts. So we'll get about, we're at 4:55, we'll get about 2 breakouts, and I think at about 10 minutes each. And so what we'll do is, Stephanie, can you pull up the first question for the first breakout? And then Josh, if we could break the room out into, about 5 people each. So here's your breakout conversation prompt. Identify 1 or 2 items from the presentation you just heard that's relevant to you and why, and then have that discussion with each other. And then after 10 minutes, we'll give you guys a warning. You'll see it come up on your screen. You'll have 60 seconds left, and then we'll bring everybody back into the main room and then give everyone a few minutes to kind of share out, the groups to share out, okay? Back. Did that seem, that went by really fast, that 10 minutes, didn't it? No, it's never enough time, you guys. Sorry. Okay, so we're going to add more time maybe to the next breakout. So since we're all back in, does anyone want to share from their groups what some of the discussion was? Anyone want to volunteer to share? No volunteers. I'm going to have to call people.
I was gonna say, can we volunteer one of our team members who?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. You can volunteer someone, sure.
So Stephanie, would you be willing to share all your great enlightened statements? As she took a drink, I didn't do that on purpose. I'm sorry.
Well, for during in our breakout session, we had shared our experiences. We're all from different parts of the state. I'm closer to San Francisco. Simon and I are both closer to San Francisco. Antoinette is down in San Bernardino, and I believe Mikkel, San Lorenzo, maybe. I'm sorry, I didn't quite catch it. But anyways, the populations in the populations that we interact with really kind of shape our experiences. Up here, Asian majority, Simon and I both haven't really experienced the sort of Asian American hate that perhaps occur in other places in the state. And then Antoinette was saying that in San Bernardino, they have a higher population of Latino and Black students. I believe she was saying that they had maybe about 2% Korean, like 2% Asian, a population in her school. And yeah, and the experience is just very different. It really reflects the places that we're in. And that's it.
Yeah, that's very true. Our lived experiences are different depending on what pockets of California we live in. Totally agree with that. Any other volunteers? How about Mary Sakuma? What conversations were happening in your room?
Hi, Margarita.
Hi.
Oh,
Good to see you too.
thank you for having us here together. Appreciate it. Well, I would like to just say I really appreciated having a conversation. It was definitely too short, and we tried to limit ourselves to really that single question. But I'll just share that a couple of things for me in terms of the work of a county office of education that really stood out to me were issues around our children in poverty and the very high percentage who remain in poverty that, who really need our support. And in particular during this pandemic, especially, but also during all the different tragedies that our county has experienced, we've really focused on feeding kids, making sure that they have an opportunity to receive meals and so forth. So it definitely reinforces some of the mission that we believe in. But I also wanted to thank my partners in the breakout room. Mia, sorry, I'm not seeing all of the screens, so I don't know if Mia's still here, but she just had some very reflective thoughts. And I don't know, Mia, if you're willing to share, but I just appreciated some of the things you had to say and share.
Thank you, Mary. So I was saying that we've seen more of the hate crime coming into different nationalities and cultures, and we've seen sectors of others stepping up. And I was just saying, instead of stepping up by sectors, I think we should be more of a united front together, just because we know that from the previous leadership that it was welcome to have that white supremacy to be okay, right? So since whether it's Filipinos, whether it's African Americans, whether it's Latinx, we've seen it more where it's wanting to suppress us, right? So instead of having sectors, I think we should be more of a united front and being together and united, since we are fighting the same, right? We want to be heard. We want to have that equal justice. We want to make sure that we're being heard throughout. So instead of just having pockets, we should be more united together. Thank you, Mary.
Yeah, that's a great point, you guys. Definitely, we can get so much more done when we're working together instead of against each other. So I appreciate that thought. Thank you. Okay, we're going to go into our second breakout so we can have a little bit more time. Stephanie, can you bring up the second question, please? All right, can you guys see that screen? So question number 2, conversation prompt number 2 is, what are your reactions to the information shared? What are some opportunities you can think of to show allyship and support? So what are some opportunities you can think of to show allyship and support? We're all back again. Hope you guys had some good conversations in your chat rooms, in your breakout rooms. Any volunteers?
Well, I'm not going to get too deep, but I just want to say that I was in a room of superstars. So I'm glad that I had the opportunity to be with them. I was like, wow, I was learning a lot.
Wait,
So,
that's impossible. I was in a room with superstars.
No, I was in a room with superstars. So it was just great hearing their stories. And you know, actually, you know, really understanding the work that needs to be done. There's a lot of work that needs to be done, and we have to dive deep into that work. So, you know, I've always been motivated because it's just who I am, but I'm just really geared up to take it to the next step in terms of how we can be allies, how we can change what's been taught, how we can change who's actually in front of our kids, right? It all matters. So I just wanted to give kudos to the team I was with. So hopefully I can connect with them again.
That's fantastic. We'll make sure you guys stay connected. Oh, by the way, if you haven't filled in your information in our connection deck in those slides we show at the beginning, please do that. We'll send that out via email too, so you can, all of you can add your information to that and we can stay connected. All right, any other volunteers? Or do I need to call on someone? How about Leo? Leo Perez.
All right, so our group, we talked about a variety of different things, but we talked about, you know, building stronger networks to be able to build a united front and a coalition of being able to address all hate and all racism. And we talked about how even within groups, sometimes, you know, there's underlying stereotypes that can affect understanding of others. And so we talked about just, you know, being able to build a diverse collection of opinions, you know, in various power structures. You know, Brian talked about, you know, having an opinion at, you know, the various seats of power, including education. And we talked about some of the things that feed, you know, some of the stereotypes, you know, movies and other media, stuff like that, where it starts to form opinions. And so we really need to get to the root of where we're starting to build these stereotypes, and especially with, you know, young kids, where, you know, they're just sponges and they absorb a lot, and we got to be careful that they don't absorb things that could be harmful down the road. So that was a big part of our conversation. But again, I thought my group was really a lot of all-stars as well. So kudos to those guys.
Well, this event is just full of all-stars, man. That's all I have to say. So thank you for sharing, Leo. All right, so it's 5:31. I want to respect your time. There is one other group that I'd like to just give 30 seconds to, and that's the group from CAPL. It's the new Asian American Pacific Islander Leadership Group. So Isaac or Shana or Victor, does anyone want to just pop in real quick to talk about how people can get connected there to CAPL?
Hi, everyone. My name is Isaac Huang. Just wanted to give you a little bit of information about CAPL, California Association of Asian Pacific Leaders in Education. So we do have information on our Twitter, which is @CAPL1 on Twitter. We also have a group, me. Unfortunately, I don't have that pulled up at the moment, but you can definitely reach out to us or go to CAPL, CAPL.org, CAAPLE.org, and to continue this conversation. So really happy to be here and looking forward to seeing many other of you in the virtual space.
Thank you, Isaac. We'll make sure you guys have all the information in our follow-up email to this event. And 5:32, jam-packed, another jam-packed day. I want to thank everyone for being here, especially Victoria Dominguez from Advancing Justice LA. Thank you to Josh in the background. Josh, where are you? Our IT support, there he is in the corner. And thank you to our partners at Afloat for helping support our event. We really appreciate our partnership with them. And I hope you guys have a rest of a great evening, and I will catch you again later. All right. Thanks, everyone.